Okay, I think we had a good opening class today, but I just wanted to hone in on a couple of points to make sure they're clearer than maybe otherwise came out in class. And of course, I'm hoping that you will gleaned this information from reading the chapter 15 as well. The idea is that there are business entities that earn income, and just like an individual pays income tax on income earned, tax code says income earned by a business entity should also be taxed. And so it came about that the tax code identified certain organizations as being business entities, and they were primarily corporations. Partnerships, as we saw, were a different form of a business entity where since partnerships were really two sole proprietorships, one here, let's say, and one here, so they'll be taxed at this level rather than the entity level. For corporations, the tax is at the entity level. The corporation pays the tax. Here, it's the individuals pay the tax earned based on their share of the profits. We mentioned in class corporations, and we also mentioned C Corp and S Corp. We'll talk more about these on Wednesday, but for now what I want to make sure you are following is that these are both statutory corporations chartered by the states. They're both just plainly, from a charter standpoint, corporations. That's all they are. They're corporations. In the charters of the states, there is no such thing as a C Corp charter or an S Corp charter. It's just plainly a corporation. What happens is that under the tax code, there is a subchapter. If you were to look at the outline, and I encourage you to look at the outline of the Internal Revenue Code to get a feel for this, there's a subchapter C, and then there's a bunch of other subchapters. Of course, there's an A and a B, and there's a bunch of others, and there's a subchapter S. Subchapter C defines the tax on a corporation one way, and subchapter S defines how to tax a corporation in a different way. These are just varieties of tax. This is tax scheme or a tax method. We'll call it a tax scheme of how the government taxes this corporation, and its particular title is the C Corp tax scheme. And here, this is another type of tax scheme, and we'll call this the S Corp tax scheme. And so under the states, they're both corporations. They're just taxed differently, and so we will refer to them based on the tax scheme that they're being taxed under, meaning whether they're being taxed under subchapter C of the code or subchapter S. And again, these come from the outline of the tax code. So again, as I said before, please go to the Internal Revenue Code, do a Google search, and look for the index, or the outline, I should say, of the Internal Revenue Code, and just see what it looks like. Go through all the subchapters and see what their titles are to get a feel for the length and breadth of the income tax code. You've had a smattering of it in Tax 1, but it's still good to take a look at this if you haven't done so before. And it really is gives you a broad scope of how far our tax code goes. So all these are merely corporations under a state charter, as I said, with different ways of being taxed. And how do you know which way to be taxed? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? I think it's a good question. So how it's going to be taxed is going to be based on an election. And we'll go over this probably again on Wednesday, and certainly throughout the course we'll be talking about it many times. But you are by default, if you choose charter under the state to be, if your charter under the state is to be a corporation, you are by default a C Corp for tax purposes. Remember, again, the concept of C Corp is merely a tax concept. You're by default a C Corp. You can become, for tax purposes, taxed as an S corporation by making an election. It's similar to check the box, making the election, but making the election to be taxed as an S corporation instead of a C corporation predates the check the box regulations. So some tax practitioners will not refer to it as check the box, some will just say make the election. Again, the concept of making the election to be taxed as a S corporation predates the check the box regulations, and therefore it's not often referred to that way. Finally, just to reiterate, check the box, those regulations are IRS regulations. Check the box regs. Oops. Let's do that a little bit better. Check the box regs. It's what in the regulations it describes how to do it, what it means, what the rules are, what the IRS will allow you to do. And the concept is specifically regarding partnerships, or we'll call them LLCs, giving LLCs, which by default are partnerships, as we said in class, by default they're partnerships, and you can just leave them that way, have them taxed as partnerships, or since these are hybrid organizations, you can check the box and say, please tax me as, and the choices are, you guessed it, I hope you guessed it, the choices are C Corp or S Corp. And see you Wednesday.